Yes. Casanova, Chapter 2. From that time onward, I became more smitten with Angela every day. She was wise and virtuous. She wanted me to love her, but she also wanted me to renounce my ecclesiastical career and marry her. I could not bring myself to do this, and yet I continued to see her, hoping to make her change her mind. I spent the entire summer carrying on a chaste courtship with her in the house of her embroidery instructor. Her extreme reserve irritated me, and my love became a torment. Still having a kind of purity myself, I was filled with respect for her. The impassioned speeches I made to her had less effect on her than on the two sisters who were her companions. If my attention had not been entirely occupied by my cruel Angela, I would no doubt have noticed that the two sisters whose names were Nanetta and Martina surpassed her in beauty and sentiment. They were her intimate friends, and she confided all her secrets to them. The embroidery instructor, a sanctimonious old lady, eventually became tired of my frequent visits and complained to the vicar, Angela's uncle. One day he told me gently that I ought not to spend so much time in the embroidery instructor's house because my attentions might be misinterpreted. I was thunderstruck by these words, but I managed to control myself and told him I would follow his advice. 3 or 4 days later, I returned to the embroidery instructor's house as though to pay her a visit, and I was careful not to stop beside the young ladies. I did, however, succeed in slipping a note into Nanetta's hand. This note contained another one for my dear Angela. In it, I told her why I had been forced to discontinue my visits, and begged her to think of some way in which I could go on seeing her. As for Nanetta, I only asked her to deliver my note to Angela and told her I hoped she would be able to give me a reply. When I returned 2 days later, she slipped me a letter which contained a short note from Angela telling me only to follow Nanetta's instructions. Here is Nanetta's letter, which I have kept to this day, along with all the other letters I quote in these memoirs. I am prepared to do anything for my friend Angela. She has supper in our house every Sunday and spends the night with us. Let me suggest a way in which you can become acquainted with Signora Orio, our aunt. Although of noble birth, she is not rich, and for this reason she wishes to be inscribed on the list of noble widows who aspire to the good graces of the Brotherhood of the Blessed Sacrament. of which Signor Malapairo is president. Last Sunday, Angela told her you stood in high favor with him, and that the surest means of obtaining his patronage was to persuade you to ask him for it. She foolishly told her that you were in love with me, that you went to our embroidery instructor's house only to speak to me, and that it would therefore be easy for me to persuade you to take an interest in her affair. My aunt replied that there was nothing to fear, since you are a priest, and that I could write you a note asking you to come to see her. I refused. Signor Rosa, her closest friend, was present during this conversation. He approved of my refusal and told her that she, not I, ought to write to you. She then wrote you a letter which you will find waiting for you when you return home. If you wish to find Angela in our house, put off your visit until Sunday. If you can obtain Signor Maripero's protection for my aunt, our house will always be open to you. But you will forgive me if I treat you badly, for I have said that I dislike you. You will do well to pay court to my aunt, who is 60 years old. Signor Rosa will not be jealous, and you will endear yourself to the entire household. As for me, I will arrange an opportunity for you to see Angela and speak to her in private. I will do everything I can to convince you of my friendship. I received Signora Orio's letter and compiled with her invitation to pay her a visit. I received Signora Orio's letter and complied with her invitation to pay her a visit. I was given a warm welcome, and I obligingly agreed to do what I could to further her cause. I spoke little to Angela, but I pretended to pay court to Nanetta, who treated me very badly. I eventually acquired the friendship of Signor Rosa, who eventually became useful to me. The next day I was in possession of a decree signed by Signor Malipero as president of the Brotherhood of the Blessed Sacrament. I hastened to pay a visit to the embroidery instructor in order to give Nanetta a note in which I told her of my success, notified her that I would come to deliver the decree to her aunt the following Sunday, and I did not forget to beg her to arrange a private conversation with Angela for me. When I arrived, Nanetta deftly slipped me a note and told me to find some way to read it before leaving the house. When I gave Signora Orio the decree, which assured her the grace she desired, she said to me, "Kiss me, my dear Abby. It won't scandalize anyone because I'm 30 years older than you." She could have said 45 without being mistaken. I gave her 2 kisses, and she invited me to sit down. "I cannot, Signora," I replied. "Why not?" "I need to." "I understand." Signora Rosa, be kind enough to. Signor Rosa took me affectionately by the hand and led me to the third floor, where he left me alone. As soon as I was free, I read my note. When I arrived, Nanetta deftly slipped me a note and told me to find some way to read it before leaving the house. When I gave Signora Orio the decree which assured her the grace she desired, she said to me, "Kiss me, my dear Abby. It won't scandalize anyone because I'm 30 years older than you." She could have said 45 without being mistaken. I gave her 2 kisses and she invited me to sit down. "I cannot, Signora," I replied. "Why not?" "I need to." "I understand. Signor Rosa, be kind enough to." Signor Rosa took me affectionately by the hand and led me to the third floor, where he left me alone. As soon as I was free, I read my note. "My aunt will invite you to stay for supper, but do not accept. Leave as soon as we sit down to table. Martina will show you to the front door, but do not go out. When the door is closed and everyone believes that you have left, go quietly up to the 4th floor and wait for us there. We will come up as soon as Signor Rosa has gone and our aunt is in bed. Angela will then be free to speak with you all night long, and I wish you luck." I came back downstairs, overflowing with happiness. When I entered the drawing room, Signora Orio thanked me effusively and told me to consider myself a friend of the family from then on. We then spent 4 hours in laughter and light-hearted conversation. When supper time came, I made my plausible excuses that Signora Orio was forced to accept them. Martina took a candle to show me to the door, but her aunt, believing Nanetta to be my favorite, ordered her to accompany me. She rapidly descended the stairs, opened the door, closed it noisily, blew out the candle, and went back into the drawing room, leaving me in darkness. I quietly climbed up to the 4th floor and entered the young lady's bedroom, where I sat down on a soft sofa and waited. I sat there for an hour or so, my mind filled with delightful thoughts. Finally, I heard the front door open and close, and a few minutes later I saw the 2 sisters and my Angela come into the room. I drew her down beside me and spent 2 hours speaking with her. When the clock struck midnight, the young ladies pitied me for not having had any supper, but their commiseration shocked me. I replied that in the midst of such happiness, it was impossible for me to take notice of any physical need. An hour later, Nanetta laughed and told me that the candle was about to burn out, so that within a short time we would find ourselves in darkness. This news filled me with joy, but I concealed my emotion. As soon as the room became dark, my arms naturally went out to embrace Angela, but I found nothing. I spent an hour trying to persuade her to sit back down beside me. Finally, I became impatient. "This joke has gone on too long," I said. "Since I have to speak to you without seeing you, at least let my hands assure me I am not speaking to the empty air." "Be calm," she said. I'm listening to you, and I can hear every word you say. You must realize that it would not be decent for me to sit beside you in this darkness. At length, I had only an hour before me, for Signora Orio would have died rather than miss morning mass. I spent the entire hour trying to convince Angela that she ought to sit down beside me. After exhausting all the most persuasive reasons, I came to entreaties, and finally to tears. Seeing that everything was useless, I was seized with that righteous indignation which ennobles anger. I heaped on her all the abuse that a despised love can suggest to an exasperated mind. I hurled fanatic curses at her. I swore to her that my love had changed to hatred, and I finally warned her to avoid me in the future, because I would kill her if I ever saw her again. My invectives ended with the darkness. At daybreak, I heard Signora Orio open the door to go off to give her soul the daily rest it required. I took my coat and hat and prepared to leave. But how can I depict my consternation when I glanced at the three young ladies and saw them all in tears, ashamed and hopeless? For a moment I felt an urge to destroy myself. Sitting down again, I reflected on my brutality in making those charming girls weep. It was impossible for me to say a word. Tears came to my aid, and I abandoned myself to them. When Nanetta told me her aunt would be back soon, I wiped my eyes and fled. I was determined never to go to Signora Orio's house again. A few days later, I went to Padua, where I received my doctorate. When I returned to Venice, I received a letter from Signor Rosa inviting me on behalf of Signora Orio to come to visit her. Sure that I would not find Angela there, I went to her house that same evening, and the gaiety of the two charming sisters dissipated. The same I felt at reappearing before them. I went to her house that same evening, and the gaiety of the two charming sisters dissipated. The same I felt at reappearing before them after an absence of 2 months. As I was leaving, Nanetta gave me a letter from Angela. If you have the courage to spend another night with me, you will have no cause for complaint, because I love you, and I would like to learn from your own lips whether you would have continued to love me if I had consented to make myself contemptible. This letter gave me great pleasure, for I saw a means of taking vengeance on Angela by cold disdain. I therefore went to Signora Orio's house the following Sunday with 2 bottles of Cypriot wine and a smoked tongue in my coat pockets. I was surprised, however, to find that my cruel Angela was not there. Nanetta told me she had told her that morning in church that she would not be able to come until supper time. I refused Signora Orio's invitation to supper, left as I had done the first time, and then went upstairs to wait. I was eager to begin the role I had decided to play, for I was sure that, even if Angela had made up her mind to change her attitude, she would be willing to grant me only a few slight favors, and I was no longer interested. My only desire was for vengeance. Less than an hour later, I heard the front door close, and Nanetta and Martina soon appeared before me. "Where's Angela?" I asked. "She must have been unable either to come or send word to us," replied Nanetta. "And yet she must know you're here. She's played a trick on me, and now she's feeling triumphant. It's lucky for her she didn't come, because I would only have mocked her. Excuse me if I doubt that." "Don't doubt it for a moment, beautiful Nanetta. You'll be convinced by the pleasant night we're going to spend together without her. I've brought provisions. You wouldn't be cruel enough to make me eat supper alone, would you?" "No, we won't be cruel. We'll eat a second supper with you." They brought bread, Parmesan cheese, and water, and the three of us sat down to eat. The Cyprian wine went to their heads, and they became delightfully gay. As I looked at them, I was amazed that I had not recognized their merit sooner. After our little supper, I asked them if they were my true friends, and whether they approved of the unworthy manner in which Angela had treated me. They replied together that I had made them weep. "Then let me have the affection of you. Then let me have the affection of a brother for you," I said, "and share it with me as though you were my sisters." The first kiss I gave them was not the result of a desire to seduce them, and they assured me several days later that they had returned it only to show me they shared my honest feelings of brotherly love. But our innocent kisses soon became ardent. We stopped them a few moments later and looked at each other in serious astonishment. I was not conceited enough to believe that they were in love with me, but I had good reason to believe that my kisses had produced the same effect on them as theirs had on me. "It's lucky for me," I said, "that I feel nothing but friendship for you, because otherwise I'd find it hard to spend the night with you without giving you proof of my affection. You are both very beautiful, and I'm sure you'd turn the head of any man who came to know you well." As I continued to speak in this vein, I pretended to be sleepy. Nanetta noticed it and said to me, "You don't have to be polite with us. Go to bed. We'll go into the next room and sleep on the sofa." "No, you go to bed in here and I'll go into the next room. If you are afraid of me, you can lock the door." "We'd never do that," said Nanetta, "but let us persuade you to go to bed in here." "I cannot sleep with my clothes on." "Then take them off. We won't look." "I'm not afraid of that, but I'll never be able to sleep if I know you're staying up on my account." "We'll go to bed too," said Martina, but without undressing. "Your mistrust is an offense to my honor. Tell me, Nanetta, do you think I am an honorable man?" "Yes, of course." "Good. But you'll have to convince me that you think so. I want you both to undress yourselves lie down beside me and count on my word of honor not to touch you. Besides, you are two against one, so you have nothing to fear." They whispered together for a moment, and then Martina told me they would lie down beside me as soon as they saw me asleep. I turned my back to them, undressed myself, bade them good night, and went to bed. I pretended to be asleep almost immediately, but soon I actually did fall asleep, and I woke up only when they lay down beside me. I remained motionless until I had a right to assume that they were asleep, and if they were not, they could plausibly pretend that they were. They were lying with their backs to me, and the room was dark, so, choosing at random, I addressed my first attentions to the one on my right, not knowing whether it was Nanetta or Martina. Proceeding gently, I gradually placed her in a position which obliged her to acknowledge her defeat and convinced her that the best thing she could do would be to go on pretending to be asleep and let me do as I pleased. So nature began to work in her. I achieved my goal, and my efforts were crowned with a success which made it impossible to doubt that I had obtained the first fruits to which prejudice, perhaps, makes us attribute such great value. Overjoyed at having so easily enjoyed a pleasure which I had just savored fully for the first time, I quietly left my lovely companion and turned to the girl on my left. I found her lying motionless on her back, as though she were sound asleep. Moderating my advances, as though I were afraid of awaking her, I began by arousing her senses, assuring myself in the process that she was as much a novice as her sister. As soon as a natural movement informed me that love was ready to receive the offering, I set about performing the sacrifice. Then, suddenly, yielding to the powerful sensations with which she was agitated, and as though tired of the simulated role she had been playing, she pressed me tightly in her arms at the moment of crisis and covered me with kisses. By these signs I recognized Nanetta, and I told her so. "Yes, it's I," she said, "and my sister and I are both fortunate, provided you are honorable and faithful. Faithful until death, my angels. And since what we've just done was the work of love, let's never mention Angela again." I asked them to get up and light some candles. Then, in the costume of the Golden Age, we finished off the remains of our supper. After telling each other 100 things which, in the intoxication of the senses, only love is permitted to interpret, we went back to bed and spent the rest of the night giving each other mutual proof of our ardor. It was Nanetta who received my last tribute. for Signora Oreo had gone to Mass, and I was obliged to hasten my departure. When I arrived home, I went to bed and slept until dinner. I returned to Signora Oreo's house 2 days later. I stayed for supper and left with Signor Rosa. During my visit, Nanetta slipped me a letter and a little package. The package contained a piece of wax in which there was the imprint of a key. The letter told me to have a key made and use it to come and see them whenever I wished. A few days later, Providence delivered us from Angela. Her father was called to Vicenza, and he took her with him. Through her absence, I found myself in tranquil possession of the 2 charming sisters with whom I spent at least 2 nights a week, easily entering their house with the key I had made. 4 months later, I received the following letter from my mother. My dear son, I have made the acquaintance of a learned monk here in Calabrian, whose fine qualities have made me think of you each time he has honored me with a visit. A year ago I told him I had a son who had devoted himself to an ecclesiastical career, but that I did not have the means to support him. He replied that my son would become his if I could persuade the Queen to have him appointed as a bishop in his own country. He said she could do so merely by writing a letter recommending him to her daughter, the Queen of Naples. Full of confidence in God, I threw myself at Her Majesty's feet and found grace there. She deigned to write to her daughter, and the monk has been appointed by the Pope as Bishop of Marano. In accordance with his promise, my son, he will take you with him, for he must pass through Venice on his way to Calabria. He has written to you himself, and I am enclosing his letter. Answer him immediately and address your letter to me. I will deliver it to him. He will hasten your progress toward the great dignities of the Church, and imagine what my consolation will be if 20 or 30 years from now I can have the happiness of seeing you at least a bishop yourself. The bishop's letter was in Latin and repeated the same things my mother had told me. It was full of unction and notified me that he would spend only 3 days in Venice. These 2 letters turned my head. Farewell, Venice. Certain that I had good prospects for a brilliant future, I was eager to set out along the path that was to lead me to it, and I was happy to note that I felt no regret at the thought of giving up everything I would have to leave behind in my native city. 3 or 4 days later, Signor Grimani informed me of the bishop's arrival and presented me to him personally. I saw a handsome monk who had been made a bishop by the grace of God, of the Holy See, and of my mother. After giving me his benediction, which I received on my knees. He pressed me to his chest and called me his dear son. He told me that, since he was unable to take me with him from Venice, I was to go to Rome alone. From there, he said, we'll travel together to Marano by way of Naples. Signor Gramani told me he would arrange for me to go as far as Ancona with the Venetian ambassador, who was preparing to leave. As soon as I was informed of the time when the ambassador's court was to embark, I went to take leave of all my acquaintances. The ship was to set sail at dawn. I went to spend the short night with my two angels. We alternated between joy and sadness, between pleasures and tears. Before leaving, I gave them back the key which had procured me such sweet moments. This love, which was my first, taught me almost nothing about the world, for it was perfectly happy and was never interrupted by any trouble or tarnished by the slightest self-interest. The three of us often felt the need to thank eternal Providence for protecting us from all the accidents which might have troubled the sweet peace we enjoyed. 3. Chapter 3. I arrived in Rome on the 1st of September at 9 o'clock in the morning. I had only 7 pioli in my pocket when I entered the ancient capital of the world, and I was there not impressed with any of its imposing aspects. I went straight to Monte Magnopoli, where, according to the address I had been given, I was to find my bishop. I was told that he had already gone, leaving orders that I was to be sent to a certain address in Naples. There was a carriage leaving the next day. Having no desire to see Rome, I stayed in bed until it was time to leave. I arrived in Naples on September 6th. I went immediately to the address I had been given and learned that the bishop had left for Marano. I vainly asked if he had left any instructions for me. No one could tell me anything, but my destiny called me to Marano. I vainly asked if he had left any instructions for me. No one could tell me anything, but my destiny called me to Marano, and I resolved to go there at once. When I arrived, I found Bishop Bernardo de Bernardis seated at a table. When I arrived, I found Bishop Bernardo de Bernardis seated at a table on which he was writing. I knelt according to custom, but instead of giving me his benediction, he stood up and embraced me. He was sincerely sorry when I told him that no one in Naples had been able to give me any information about him. He asked me to sit down and ordered a servant to set a place for me at a table. His house was spacious, but it was badly built, badly kept, and badly furnished. He was an intelligent and honorable man, and I was surprised to learn that his bishopric brought him only 500 ducats a year. Furthermore, he had debts amounting to 600 ducats. I asked him if he had good books, a circle of men of letters, or a noble society in which he could pleasantly spend a few hours. He smiled and told me that in all his diocese there was not one person with any literary taste or knowledge, and that there was not a single real bookseller. He promised, however, that we would cultivate literature together as soon as he received the books he had requested in Naples. That was all very well, but without a good library, a selected circle of friends, or a literary correspondence, was this the place in which I ought to settle down at the age of 18? The good bishop, seeing me pensive and apparently dismayed by the kind of life I would have to lead there, tried to encourage me by assuring me he would do everything in his power to make me happy. The next day, the bishop was obliged to officiate pontifically, and I had an opportunity to see the men and women who filled his cathedral. The sight of them made me resolve to leave. What ugliness in the women! What an air of stupidity and coarseness in the men! When I returned to the good prelate's house, I told him I had no inclination to die the death of a martyr in his sad city. "Give me your benediction and send me away," I said, or rather come with me. I promise you we'll make our fortune together somewhere else. This proposition made him laugh repeatedly the rest of the day. If he had accepted it, he would not have died in the prime of life 2 years later. Seeing how well founded my repugnance was, he asked me to forgive him for the mistake he had made in having me come there, feeling it his duty to send me back to Venice, yet having no money and not knowing that I had some of my own. He told me he would send me to a gentleman in Naples who would give me 60 ducats, with which I could return to my native city. I accepted his offer with gratitude. It was thus that I left Marano 60 hours after arriving there. When I arrived in Naples, I immediately delivered the letter which the bishop had given me. It was addressed to Signor Gennaro Polo, who told me he wanted me to stay in his house so that I could meet his son, who was also a poet. The bishop's letter said I was sublime in poetry. After the customary polite refusals, I accepted his offer and had my trunk taken to his house. His family consisted of his son, a daughter who was not pretty, his wife, and 2 elderly and pious sisters. The next day at supper, I became acquainted with the wisest of all Neapolitans, the illustrious Don Ilio Carafa, of the family of the Dukes of Matalona. He offered me a large salary if I would undertake to direct the studies of his nephew, the Duke of Matalona, who was then 10 years old. I refused with thanks and asked him to become my benefactor in another manner, by giving me some good letters of recommendation for Rome. He granted me this favor without hesitation. He sent me 2 letters the next day, one addressed to Cardinal Aquiva and the other to Father Georgie. When I saw that the interest my new friends were taking in me was moving them to think of presenting me to the Queen of Naples, I hastened to make arrangements for my departure, for it was obvious that she would have questioned me, and that I would not have been able to avoid telling her I had just left Marano and the poor bishop she had placed there. Furthermore, she knew my mother, and nothing could have prevented her from telling what she was doing in Dresden. Knowing the strength of prejudice, I realized that in that case, I would find myself without resources. I therefore did well to leave at the right time. As I was leaving, Signor Polo gave me my 60 ducats. His son asked me to write to him and swore eternal friendship. The whole family accompanied me to my carriage, showering me with vows and blessings. It was not until I was outside the city that I began to examine my traveling companions. Beside me sat a middle-aged man with a pleasant, alert expression. Opposite me, my gaze was arrested by the charming faces of 2 young and pretty ladies who were very well dressed and had an air of both candor and decency. All the way to Capua, the 3 of them spoke to each other almost without interruption, and, incredible as it may seem, I did not open my mouth one single time. It was quite a feat for me to spend 5 hours sitting opposite 2 charming ladies without addressing them the slightest compliment. When we reached Capua, where we were to spend the night, we stopped at an inn and were given a room with 2 beds, as is commonly done in Italy. The man said to me, I'll have the honor of sleeping with you, Abby. I replied, with a serious air, that he had a right to choose, and even to arrange things differently if he so desired. My reply brought a smile to the lips of one of the ladies, the one who pleased me the most, and I took this as a good sign. After supper, I went downstairs and asked the coachman who the other travelers were. The gentleman is a lawyer, he said, and one of the 2 ladies is his wife, but I don't know which one. I came back upstairs a short time later and went to bed before the others, in order to leave the ladies free to undress themselves at ease. The next day was spent in varied and witty conversation. My growing inclination took strength from the affectionate manner of the lady who had provoked it. She asked me if I intended to stay in Rome for a while before returning to Venice. I entered that since I knew no one there. I was afraid I might be bored. Strangers are well received in Rome, she said, and I'm sure you'd like it there. Then may I hope to be allowed to call on you there? I asked. We'll be honored to receive you, said the lawyer. I had my eyes fixed on his charming wife, and I saw her blush, but I pretended not to notice. We stopped in Terracine and spent the following night in Marino. By then, I was in great favor with the lovely Roman lady. Our eyes spoke little while we were in the carriage, but seated opposite each other. The language of our feet had all the eloquence one could wish. The lawyer told me he was going to Rome for an ecclesiastical matter, and that he would stay with his mother-in-law, whom his wife wished to visit, not having seen her at all during the 2 years they had been married. Her sister expected to stay in Rome and marry an employee of the Banco del Spirito Santo. We reached Rome early in the morning. When I took leave of them, I promised to pay them a visit the following day. I now found myself in Rome, well dressed, fairly well supplied with money, armed with a certain amount of experience and some good letters of recommendation, perfectly free, and at an age when a man can count on fortune if he has a little courage and a face which disposes people in his favor. I was not really handsome, but I had something more valuable, a certain quality which forcibly attracted benevolence. I knew that Rome was the only city in which a man could start with nothing and achieve anything he wanted. This thought bolstered my courage. I must admit that my confidence was also increased by my boundless self-esteem, which my inexperience prevented me from mistrusting. A man called upon to make his fortune in this ancient capital of the world must be a chameleon, capable of reflecting all the colors of the atmosphere around him, a produce able to take on any form. He must be supple, ingratiating, dissimulating, impenetrable, often base, treacherously sincere, always pretending to know less than he really does, patient, master of his facial expressions, and as cold as ice when anyone else in his place would be aflame. And if he has the misfortune to have no religion in his heart, he must have religion in his mind, suffering in silence. If he is an honest man, the mortification of having to admit his hypocrisy to himself. If he abhors this type of conduct, he would do better to leave Rome and seek his fortune. He would do better to leave Rome and seek his fortune elsewhere. Of all these qualities, I do not know whether I am boasting or confessing. I had only amiability. Aside from that, I was only an interesting but irresponsible young man. I began by delivering my letter of introduction to Father Georgie, a learned monk who had earned the esteem of the entire city, including the Pope himself. After reading the letter, he told me he was prepared to be my advisor. Don Ilio also gave me a letter for Cardinal Aquiva, I said. Then I congratulate you because he's a man who, in Rome, can do more than the Pope. Should I take my letter to him immediately? No. I'm going to see him this evening and I'll speak to him about you. Come back tomorrow and I'll tell you where and when to deliver it. Do you have any money? Enough for at least a year. Excellent. Do you speak French? Not a word. That's too bad. You'll have to learn it. And I hope you'll take your letter to the Cardinal dressed as a modest abbé, not in those elegant clothes you're wearing now. Goodbye. I'll see you tomorrow. The next day he told me the Cardinal had already received a letter about me from Don Ilio, and that he would receive me toward noon at Villa Labyrinth. When I arrived there, the Cardinal put my letter into his pocket without reading it, looked at me for a long time, and then asked me if I had any inclination for politics. I replied that until then I had had only frivolous inclinations, and that I could answer only for my eagerness to carry out any orders it might please him to give me if he should find me worthy of entering his service. Come to my office tomorrow, he said, and speak to Father Gama, whom I will inform of my intentions. And you must begin to learn French as soon as possible. It's an indispensable language. Then, after asking me about Don Lilio's health, he gave me his hand to kiss and dismissed me. I was now eager to see Lucrezia, the lovely lady I had met on my way to Rome, and Angelica, her sister. I went to their address and asked for Donna Celia Monti, their mother. I was surprised to see a young widow who appeared to be the sister of her charming daughters. Lucrezia came in and introduced me to her youngest sister, who was only 11, and to her brother, a 15-year-old abbé. I conducted myself in a way which I hoped would please her mother. Modesty, respect, and demonstrations of keen interest in everything I saw. After a time, the good lawyer arrived and began to speak light-heartedly. I took part in the conversation, but I was careful not to give my words the gaiety which had made us laugh so much in the carriage. Lucrezia did not know what to think of my change of mood. As I was leaving, the lawyer told me that his mother-in-law wished me to become a friend of the family and feel free to visit them at any time. I thanked him affectionately and left. The next day I presented myself to Father Gama. He was a Portuguese, about 40 years old, with a handsome face which clearly showed candor, gaiety, and wit. He told me I would be lodged in the Cardinal's own palace, and that, until I learned French, I would work at making extracts of letters. He gave me the address of a French teacher to whom he had already spoken about me, a lawyer named Delacroix. After giving me these short instructions and assuring me I could count on his friendship, he had me taken to the Cardinal's Majordomo, who gave me 60 piasters as 3 months' advance salaries. He then showed me to the room which had been assigned to me. I had my baggage brought from my inn and found myself installed in a palace where I would no doubt have made my fortune brilliantly if I had been able to maintain a kind of conduct that was violently opposed to my character. I went to see my advisor, Father Georgie, and told him what had happened. He told me I was off to a good start and that my progress would depend only on how I conducted myself. I'm afraid my youth and inexperience will force me to bother you often, I said, but you'll always find me respectful and obedient. And you'll often find me too severe, he replied, but I don't think you'll tell me everything. Everything? Absolutely everything. Allow me to laugh, for example. You haven't told me where you spent 4 hours yesterday. That's nothing important. I met those people on the way to Rome, and I think they are an honorable family. They are a very honorable family. They all like you, and they hope you'll be a frequent visitor. I learned all that this morning, but you mustn't visit them. Must I? I learned all that this morning, but you must not visit them. Must I suddenly stop seeing them altogether? No, that would not be polite. Visit them once or twice a week, but no more. Remember that your reason has no greater enemy than your heart. But my heart is in no danger in their house. So much the better. In that case, it won't be hard for you to go there less often. It's my duty to believe you. And it's my duty to follow your wise advice. From now on, I'll go to Donna Thilia's house only occasionally. Heartbroken, I took his hand to kiss it, but he embraced me paternally instead. I had dinner in the Cardinal's palace at a table occupied by a dozen or so abbeys. I was so full of chagrin that I did not say a word during the entire meal. Loving Lucrezia as I did, giving her up seemed to me a barbarous action. For the sake of my future, I was obliged to destroy my present happiness and become the enemy of my own heart. I revolted against this necessity. It struck me as artificial, and it seemed to me that I could acknowledge it only by debasing myself before the tribunal of my own reason. I was occupied with such reflections for the rest of the day and part of the night. The next morning, Father Gamma brought me some ministerial letters and told me to place them in order. After working at this task for a short time, I went out for my first French lesson. That evening, I went to see Lucrezia. Lucrezia. That evening, I went to see Lucrezia. The whole family had already learned what had happened to me, and they congratulated me on it. The lawyer invited me to go with them to Testaco or Testaccio for a picnic the following Thursday. I was careful to tell the good Father Georgie about this outing before he could learn of it from anyone else. When I asked him for permission to accept the invitation, he told me I must do so, since it was a family outing, and there was no reason why I should not become acquainted with the countryside around Rome. I went to Donna Cecilia's house in a two-seated carriage which I had rented for the occasion. The charming widow introduced me to Don Francesco, her future son-in-law. He impressed me as a rather dull-witted, and his behavior was quite different from what one would expect of a young man about to marry a pretty girl like Angelica. But he was honorable and rich, which made up for everything else. When we were ready to leave, the lawyer told me he would go with me in my carriage, while the three ladies went with Don Francesco in his four-seated carriage. A promenade and a picnic provided by the lawyer occupied us until the end of the day. I contributed more than my share to the gaiety of the company, and I did nothing to betray my love for Lucrezia. As we were preparing to return to Rome, the lawyer led Donna Cecilia to his carriage, where Angelica and Don Francesco were already seated. Hardly able to conceal my joy, I offered my arm to Lucrezia. How many things we would have said to each other before abandoning ourselves to our love if our time had not been so limited. But we knew we had only half an hour before us. We were intoxicated with happiness when suddenly she pushed me back and arranged her clothing. The carriage stopped and a servant opened the door. "What's happened?" I asked. "We are in front of my house," she replied. Each time I think of that event, it seems fantastic to me, for it is not possible to reduce time to nothing. When I returned home, I went to bed, but how could I go to sleep? I was still heated from the flame which Lucrezia ignited in me. I stayed in bed until it was time for me to take my French lesson the next morning. My teacher had a daughter named Barbara, who occasionally gave me my lesson when he was unable to do so. She was in love with a handsome young man who also came to her house to take lessons. I became acquainted with him, and he often came to see me. One day I met him as I was leaving church and reproached him for not having visited me recently. He told me that a terrible disaster had made him lose his head and that he was desperate. When I asked him to open his heart to me, he led me into a cloister and told me the following story. I've been in love with Barbara for 6 months now, and she's given me undeniable proof of her love for me. But 5 days ago, her father surprised us. together in a delicate situation and ordered me never to set foot in his house again. I can't ask her to marry me because I have a married brother and my father isn't rich. Now that I've told you everything, tell me how she is. She must be as unhappy as I am. What can I do? I could do nothing but pity him, for my honor would not allow me to become involved in the situation. I told him I had not seen Barbara for 5 days, and not knowing what else to say, I gave him the advice which fools always give in such cases, to forget her. Despite the flame which the trip to Testaccio had kindled in all my senses, I had not seen my Lucrezia for 4 days. I finally yielded to the desire that was dominating me and went to see her. I found her alone and looking sad. I cannot believe it's impossible for you to find time to see me, she said. It's not because I lack time, I replied. It's because I'm so jealous of my love that I'd rather die than have it discovered. I have decided to invite you and your family to have dinner with me in Frascati, and I have hopes that we'll be able to be alone together there. Oh yes, do that. I'm sure your invitation won't be refused. A quarter of an hour later, the rest of her family came in and they accepted my invitation for the following Sunday. I told them my carriage would be in front of their door at 7 o'clock in the morning. The next day I went to Signor Delacroix's house for my French lesson as usual. As I was leaving, I saw Barbara. She looked at me and dropped the piece of paper. I considered it my duty to pick it up, because otherwise it might have been noticed by the maid who was coming down the stairs at the time. It was a note to me, inside which there was a note, inside in which there was another one for her lover. The one addressed to me read as follows: If you are afraid it would be a mistake to deliver this note to your friend, burn it. Have pity on an unhappy girl and be discreet. The other one, unsealed, contained these words: If your love is equal to mine, you cannot hope to be happy without me. We cannot speak or write to each other by any means except the one I have dared to employ. I am ready, without reserve, to do anything which will unite our destinies until death. Think and decide. Think and decide. The poor girl's cruel situation moved me to the depths of my heart, and yet I decided to give the note back to her the next day. A short time after I returned home, however, the poor lover came to see me. His eyes were aflame, his voice was hoarse, and he depicted his despair so vividly to me that, fearing some desperate action, I did not feel I could refuse him the relief it was in my power to give him. This was my first mistake in that fateful affair. I was the victim of my sensitive heart. When the unfortunate young man read Barbara's note, he kissed it with ecstatic joy, wept threw his arms around my neck, thanked me for saving his life, and finally begged me to deliver an answer because his sweetheart must be in need of the same consolation he had received. He assured me his letter would not compromise me in any way. The next day I learned that Signor Delacroix was ill. I was delighted to find his daughter at his house bedside, where she gave me my lesson. I managed to slip her the note from her lover without difficulty. At 7 o'clock the next morning, I was at Donna Cecilia's door with my carriage. After ordering a fine dinner at Frascati, we went off to visit the Villa Labyrinth. Since it was possible that we might become separated, we all agreed to meet at the inn at 1 o'clock. The discreet widow took her son-in-law's arm. Angelica took that of her fiancé. Lucrezia was my delightful companion. In less than a quarter of an hour, we were alone together. A month ago, I said to her, I was still ignorant. You are the first woman. You are the first woman to initiate me into the true mysteries of love. A month ago, I said to her, I was still ignorant. You are the first woman to initiate me into the true mysteries of love. It will be a terrible blow to me when you leave, Lucrezia, because there cannot be another woman like you in all of Italy. What? I'm your first love? You're also the first love of my heart, and you'll certainly be the last. How happy the woman who loves you after me will be. I won't be jealous of her, but I'll suffer from not knowing whether she has a heart like mine. Seeing that my eyes were moist with tears, she gave free rein to her own. We sat down on the grass, and our lips mingled. In a moment of calm, I contemplated the most ravishing of all disorders. I told her we might be surprised by someone. Don't worry about that, she replied. Our guardian spirits are watching over us. Later, as we were resting and drawing new strength from our amorous gazes, she cried out, Look, did not I tell you? He's watching over us. He's trying to reassure us with his eyes. Look at the little demon. Admire him. He's surely either your guardian spirit or mine. I thought she had fallen into delirium. What do you mean? I asked. What do you want me to admire? Don't you see that pretty snake with his head raised as though he were worshipping us? I looked in the direction she was indicating and saw a brightly colored snake, about a yard long, which actually was looking at us. This sight did not amuse me, but I did not want to appear less intrepid than she. Is it possible that you're not frightened of him? I asked. I'm delighted to see him, and I'm sure he has only the outer form of a snake. But if he crawled up to you hissing, then I'd hold you more tightly in my arms and defy him to do me any harm. In your arms, I'm not afraid of anything. Look, he's going away. Hurry! By going away, he's warning us that some intruder is coming. We had hardly stood up and resumed our stroll when we saw Donna Cecilia and the lawyer emerge from a nearby lane. When we walked toward them without quickening our pace, as though it were quite natural to meet them there, I asked Donna Cecilia if her daughter was afraid of snakes. In spite of all her intelligence, she said, she's so afraid of thunder that she nearly faints, and she shrieks in terror at the sight of the smallest snake. These words proved to me that I had just witnessed a true miracle of love. We casually separated from them again. Tell me, I said to Lucrezia as soon as we were alone again, what would you have done if, instead of your pretty snake, your husband and your mother had suddenly appeared? Nothing. Don't you know that in such solemn moments, lovers feel nothing but love? Can you doubt that you have possessed me completely? In saying this to me, Lucrezia was not simply making a pretty speech. There was nothing but truth in her expression and the tone of her voice. Do you think anyone suspects us? I asked. My husband doesn't think we're in love. My mother is intelligent and she may have guessed the truth, but she knows such things are no longer her affair. My sister probably knows everything, but she's discreet and she feels sorry for me. She has no idea of my feelings for you. If I hadn't met you, I would probably have lived my whole life without knowing what love really is, because what I feel for my husband. We spent the entire morning telling each other of our love and providing proof for it repeatedly. Then we returned to the inn and had a delicate dinner, during which I paid a great deal of attention to the amiable Donna Cecilia. After coffee had been served, I paid the innkeeper, and we went off to plunge into the labyrinths of the Villa Dobrandini. What sweet memories that place has left me. It seemed to me that I was seeing my divine Lucrezia for the first time. Our eyes were filled with burning desire. Our hearts palpitated together in tender impatience, and instinct guided us to a solitary retreat which love itself seemed to have created for the consummation of its rites. There, beneath a clump of trees, was a wide stretch of grass, backed up by a dense thicket. An immense plain was spread out before our eyes, and we could see down the lane to a distance which protected us from any surprise visit. We had no need to speak. Our hearts understood each other. Our meager hands quickly removed all barriers between us and restored to nature the charms of which she is deprived by clothing. Then for 2 hours we abandoned ourselves to the sweetest of all pleasures. Finally, enchanted and satisfied, we looked at each other and cried out spontaneously together, "Love, I thank you." We exchanged tender confidences. We exchanged tender confidences. She told me Angelica's fiancé was rich, that he had a fine house in Tivoli, and that he would probably invite us there to spend the night. I hope love will help us find a way to spend it together, she said. Then she added sadly, "But my husband is doing so well with the affair that brought him to Rome that I'm afraid we may be leaving before long." The trip back to Rome took 2 hours. I was a little tired when I reached home, but a long sleep, such as one has at that age, restored all my vigor, and the next morning I went to take my French lesson at the usual time.